But as I was talking to people last night, there was a growing sense that the Omani foreign minister was almost trying to will it into existence, try to put a positive spin on things to try to get out ahead of this and prevent it. If he talked it up big enough, maybe the strike wouldn't come. But at that point, President Trump had apparently already made his mind. We saw his comments in Texas yesterday afternoon, very upset with how he deemed Tehran was handling these negotiations. And we started to get word that strikes would likely come, though sooner than expected. President Trump does like the element of surprise. We have seen that last summer with Iran. We saw that in early January in Venezuela. It appears that in some fashion anyway, these strikes came a little earlier than most expected. And we should just note, I mean, to Ali's point, yes, some phone calls in the last 12 hours or so, but very little congressional consultation on the whole. Very little effort, even more strikingly, to sell the public on this war. He barely mentioned it in his State of the Union address on Tuesday. So for some Americans waking up to this news today, they're going to be surprised that A, we're attacking Iran again, but B, words from the president himself in that video message overnight that some American lives will likely be lost. That's different. That's something that Trump has avoided with his one-off military strikes, both in his first term and now in the second, when they're occurring more regularly. That's a threshold that he has been unwilling to cross. A lot of his base doesn't want him to cross. And we'll see. If this remains a relatively limited back and forth, that's one thing. But if this does, as expected, turn into a wider, prolonged conflict and it destabilizes the region, American military members are killed, this has to become a lengthy commitment, this will, frankly, Willie, in part define his presidency in a way that I'm not sure, he, and so many people around him would have wanted when he retook the oath of office just over a year ago.
Yeah. I think you're so right. I think one of the most surprising things about this is not the attack, because many people thought it might be a Venezuela-style attack, a one and done, but the president preparing Americans for the loss of American lives in this campaign. That is something that I think even the president's closest supporters didn't think was going to happen. So this suggests he is willing to stake a good part of his legacy on this. Jonathan Lemire and Ali Vitale, thank you so much for your reporting. Stay with us.
Yeah, it's just past 8:30 on the East Coast. We're following major breaking news for you this morning here on MS Now. Let's bring in Karine Sajapur. He is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and one of the preeminent experts on Iran and the region as a whole. And David Ignatius, you can take the first question.
So, Kareem, you're one of the people who knows Iran best. President Trump, in his statement announcing the launching of this campaign, in effect called on the Iranian people to take to the streets after the U.S. had hit Iranian targets. And I want to ask you whether you think that's likely, that Iranians will indeed come out of their houses amid the chaos and challenge the regime, as the president hopes. And second, if that happens, and the IRGC and the Basij, the two Iranian forces that Khamenei, Supreme Leader, would use to try to suppress those demonstrations, what would the U.S. do in response? You have people then who might be being slaughtered in the streets. Would that force the United States to do what President Trump so far hasn't done, which is to put in troops?
David, it's a very important question. One of the very first images we see from this conflict was a girls' school in Tehran that was obviously inadvertently bombed, and it looked like there were at least 50 deaths of a children's school. And so this is for the Iranian people a very early sign of the horrors of war. What President Trump admonished people to do is to first wait until the bombing is stopped. He said to people to stay in their homes, and then once the bombing is stopped, to take over their government. But as you alluded to, this is a regime which still has an enormous repressive capacity. There's at least 150,000 Revolutionary Guardsmen. There's perhaps double that number in Basij militia. And the mentality of this regime right now is kill or be killed. And so we haven't yet seen, obviously we're very early days, early hours, we haven't yet seen cracks within Iran's security establishment, but that will be determinative as to whether this regime can stay in power and stay cohesive, or people will sense an opportunity and rise up against it.
And Kareem, we just in the last few weeks saw that brutal repressive power of the regime as protesters bravely took to the streets, and thousands of them were killed right there where they protested. So as the President of the United States now explicitly calls for regime change, can you speak, Kareem, to the relative weakness or strength of the regime in the country? We know it's repressive power, but in terms of popular support generationally, a regime that effectively has been in power since 1979, how popular or unpopular is the regime, and what does that mean for the potential for regime change?
Well, Willie, I think this is one of the most hated regimes in the world by its people. There's, in my view, no country in the world with a greater gap between its government and its people than Iran. And so I would estimate that at best it has perhaps 15 to 20% at most popular support, the vast majority being opposed. But what the regime does have is the fact that it's heavily armed, heavily organized, and willing to kill en masse, as they demonstrated last month, to stay in power, in particular because this regime is so lonely, it doesn't have a plan B. It doesn't have a strategy for the political and military elite to go remake their lives in Damascus or Moscow. And so the question is there going to be a follow-on by the United States? What continued political targets will the government of Israel attack? We knew there was attacks on the Supreme Leader's compound. If the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has been ruling the country 37 years, if he's killed, what is the impact on the regime? Do people close ranks, or do they sense that the ship is sinking and they jump off? These are all questions that will be determined in the coming days. But I think one thing that it is clear is that the president's intention is not to recreate what happened in 2001 and the removal of the Taliban in Afghanistan, in 2003, the removal of Saddam Hussein in Iraq to send American boots in Iran. And so this is a population which, outnumbers the regime significantly, but it's a regime which significantly outmatches the population in terms of its coercive capacity.